What you find out in your life when you're young, and you need to know this, all of you, is that you need to get good at least one thing. So you need to get very good at least one thing. You have to specialize in something. And that was really the point of an apprenticeship, right? Because you subject yourself to a master, and I'll use that term despite its connotations, let's say. You subjected yourself voluntarily to the discipline imposed in a single direction. The philosophers, Nietzsche, pointed out that nothing of any value could be attained, even on the front of freedom, without first subjecting yourself to intense voluntary discipline. And so he thought of voluntary slavery in some sense as the precondition for freedom. And you can think about that. Imagine that you're trying to learn to play a musical instrument, or imagine what you had to go through when you learned to read. There's that initial process of skill automation, which is very painstaking and difficult. But once you master it, to pass through that disciplinary structure, then you have freedoms that you wouldn't have had before. Once you learn to read music and to position your hands properly on the piano keyboard and to play the appropriate scales and chords, then you can play music, and you couldn't do that to begin with. And so the subjugation of yourself to a disciplinary structure actually frees you. This is another thing conservatives have to tell young people. And then the other thing you'll note, that you do note as you get older, if you've gone through a disciplinary process or a multitude of them, is that they first narrow you as you specialize, but then as you get deeper and deeper into your specialization, the world broadens out in front of you. And so, for example, when I went off to do my PhD, I studied alcoholism. But in order to study alcohol and its effects on the brain, I had to study neuroscience and neuropsychology. And once I started studying neuroscience and neuropsychology, neuropharmacology for that matter as well, then I had to understand, well, turns out I had to understand, at least to the degree I was capable, the functioning of the entire brain, because alcohol washes the entire brain like water. And so I had to write a thesis, which is a disciplinary process, focused particularly on the genetic predisposition among males with multi-generational family histories of alcoholism to alcohol reward. And that's a very specific topic, but it didn't matter, because as I got deeper and deeper into it, it started to reconnect to the whole world. And so extremely useful for you to master something. Pick something, or more than one thing, but start with something. And in some sense, it doesn't really matter what it is. It just matters that you do it. And what will happen is you'll also develop the discipline that goes along with that process of self-mastery. And once you have that discipline instantiated because you subjected yourself voluntarily to a particular goal, you could take that discipline and subject yourself to other goals as a consequence. And so you don't have to worry that if you become a master of one thing, you become a jack of no trades. The greatest people I've met, I knew a great artist in Montreal. He was a very good friend of mine. And he was a licensed taxi driver and a licensed carpenter and a licensed boat pilot and a great interior decorator and extremely skilled socially and a great visual artist. He had that all at his fingertips, and that was multiple masters. He had served multiple masters and become a master himself. Advice was something like the advice he derived from the alchemist, was that if you were going to mess around with very complicated and dangerous matters, that's a good way of putting it, that you should really put your life together. And so I would say the right way to deal with your neuroticism is to increase your conscientiousness, because we also know that the higher your conscientiousness, the lower your neuroticism. Conscientiousness does seem to keep neuroticism in check. And so I would say, and have said this to many people, clean your room, organize your life, like get a routine, get up every day at the same time, go to bed at the same time, establish disciplined habits, and that will help a lot. Schedule, and here's how to use a schedule. Use a calendar, use Google Calendar, but don't use it as a tyrant. You want to use a calendar as if it's your confidant and advisor. And what you want to do is use the calendar, sit down, open the calendar and think, okay, well, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to design a week of days that I would really like to have. So what that would mean then is that you would schedule things that you would consider meaningful and productive, on a daily basis, so that you feel that your life is justified by having a day like that, and also to schedule enough of your responsibilities so that you make progress day by day instead of falling farther behind. And what that'll do is it doesn't directly affect your neurophysiology, but, you're reacting as a neurotic person, a person high in neuroticism. Say, You react to uncertainty and the unexpected with more physiological preparedness and more expenditure of energy than the typical person. And so what you want to do is organize your surroundings, because it's a lot easier to organize your surroundings, at least to begin with, than it is to do radical reconstruction on your fundamental temperament, which you might not be able to do at all. So I would say discipline. And the other thing I would say for creative people, and this is true for people in general, but it's really important for creative people, is that if you want to be creative, which is very, very dangerous and very, very unlikely to succeed, although absolutely necessary if you happen to be high in openness, is that you should organize the rest of your life, except for your creative endeavors, in a pretty traditional and conservative manner, if you can do that, because what that does is buttress you against the unexpected and give you some stability on along many of the potential dimensions of your life. And that frees you up to take larger risks in the creative domain. Now, it's hard for creative people to do that because they're sort of blasting out, laterally in all directions simultaneously, but you exhaust yourself that way, and you also risk scattering yourself. Louis Watterson here had a question. How would you suggest someone who's a jack of all trades and master of none conduct themselves? Well, you're probably high in openness, high in creativity. And one of the dangers of being high in creativity, especially if you're also high in neuroticism, is that it's hard for creative people to catalyze an identity because they're basically Pan-like, like Peter Pan or like Pan, which means everything. The god of the forest is the god of everything to some degree. And the problem with being everything is that you're also nothing at the same time because you never specialize. And so I would say that I think that being a jack of all trades is pretty damn useful, but I would also say that it's really necessary to buckle down and find one primary mode of discipline. And if you can't figure out what you should do, then guess. Just pick something that you think that you could hit hard and concentrate on. You don't have to be perfect at it. You don't even have to get it right. But pick something rather than nothing, or pick something rather than all things. And then set yourself to master that. Because, you need to have a discipline, a primary discipline. It's absolutely necessary to succeed in life. Now, once you have a primary discipline, then you can branch out and become a multiplicity in your disciplined approach, and then you're absolutely bloody unstoppable. Start the journey toward becoming a master by subjecting yourself to other masters, and that's really what you're supposed to do when you get educated, particularly in the humanities, because that's a apprenticeship with masters. And so you might think, like people often think when they won't discipline their children, that if you strain your creativity in a single direction, you're going to eradicate your flexibility and your creativity, but you won't. You'll just bring order to your chaos. And once you do that, all that creative potential that you have within you will be much more likely to manifest itself. So it's very useful to seriously discipline yourself voluntarily, especially when you're young. You can find out what constraints you can abide within. You can find out how hard you can push yourself. You can find out how hard you can work. You can find out how productive and generous you can be. And all that's unbelievably useful. And then you can dial it back a bit so it becomes sustainable, But it's good to wear yourself right to the bone if you can while you're young, so you start to understand who you are. And you can't do that without pushing yourself right